plugin of the week is the Universal Audio Eventide model H910 Harmonizer. This is a classic piece of gear from Eventide coming back from the mid-70s. It's actually a very powerful processor considering the era. Essentially, in the early 70s, this was sort of the beginning of the earliest days of digital technology, and the earliest products that came out from Lexicon and Eventide were simple delays. And there were these big boxes that would give you like a couple milliseconds of delay. And some of these were really primarily brought in to act as pre-delays for EMT plates and things like that. And as the technology developed, the amount of time would get up into the hundreds of milliseconds. And so these were like these huge advancements. And these were literally chips that were like 100 of them that were stacked up in a row. It was so, we're really talking about earlier day digital technology. It's really pretty amazing thinking about it, how archaic at the time it was. What's interesting about this plugin is that the vast majority of this particular hardware, the H910, is that the majority of it is actually analog components except for the delay component. So the delay component is the only digital aspect of it, and then the readout was the early days of these LED readouts. So for me, it was playing those old Tecmo like football and baseball games with little dancing LEDs, and you kind of move around other LEDs that are chasing you, trying to tackle you, stuff like that. So it kind of harkens back to that era. But it's very cool. This was like a piece of hardware from the mid-70s. It was actually, there was a thing here, like there was always this weird glitchy thing. Like you notice that the clock time is kind of moving around, like it keep dancing around like to 0.99 or 0.1. And this has to do with the actual clock that was used. Most digital devices use like a quartz crystal or some form of a crystal for their clock source, which is much more stable. It resonates at a very particular frequency, and then you can kind of create whatever digital processing that you need to do can be kind of consistent. But with this, it wasn't really the case. They used a tuned LC or an inductor capacitor oscillator and it has like this random kind of thing where it just moves around. There's no consistency to the modulation, but it creates this kind of glitchy, kind of cool effect, which Universal Audio captured really well. Now, when you go through the plugin, you have a line in. What's interesting about this actually is if you start running signal into it and then you pop it in, the signal that was feeding into it will be processing it. You just won't be hearing it, so that you'll hear the process signal from what was happening prior popping through. So you can actually kind of automate that in for effect in particular sections. You have an input level, pretty straightforward, although riding the input level is an important part of changing the character. This is a very level-dependent type of device in that when you feed signal in, it will be very responsive, more or less responsive to the amount of signal that's feeding into it. And so you may find, and this is the case, that working with it, you would be riding and setting that input level very carefully to get the control. Feedback, so what you have is a delay circuit here, and then you have a feedback control, which runs through the pitch harmonization. So you can create all kinds of cool, simple effects, octave down or octave up with the manual control. And then there's an anti-feedback control. Now, some of the controls are disabled unless you select from the menu here what it is that you're doing. So you could have it in delay-only mode, and in delay-only mode, you have a series of delay options, 7.5, 15, 30, 60. Now, what happens is they're additive buttons, so you can get different delay times based on adding up the amount of delay by selecting the different buttons. There's also a second output, which has a secondary set of delays, which can be added in. So you can add that on top, and it has a separate output level control here. So you have the main output, which shows up here, and this. When you turn off the delay only, then what happens is you still have a delay, but only these two buttons here. So you'll have these two 30 millisecond buttons available to you in terms of delay time. And then you select how you're going to work or modulate it. You could work with the main manual pitch control, which allows you to adjust the pitch accordingly here. Then you can work with the anti-feedback, which does like a progressive how do they describe it? Describe it as like a progressive, very small up and down frequency shifts. The design or the idea or concept behind it was that it was meant to sort of be an anti-room mode kind of thing. So if you record a microphone, and you will get delays in that room, which will create a certain tonal character. And this is meant to kind of be the opposite effect to sort of remove that. I've never used it that way, but that was the idea and the design of it. There is also a keyboard attachment which you could get. And with this keyboard attachment, you could set the pitch based on the keyboard hitting particular notes. And this would drive it, as you could see here, up an octave, down an octave, or any series of notes in between. There's a hold button here which would allow you to lock in a particular note. So we'll kind of hear some examples with that. And then there's an envelope control. So when you enable this, then this series of buttons becomes available. So now the pitch or modulation of the signal will go through the envelope follower here, and then you have attack, release, and sensitivity controls that allows you to control it. You have mix controls and output level controls, and then it's just pure fun from there. So one of the things that in using this, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to feed a bass signal into it. So we'll just start by just feeding a simple bass sound in and start from here. And let me just cue up to where the... So now what I have here is if I just kind of go here, let me just kind of go to a manual pitch mode. So this is on a send return configuration, so I can add this in. Now if I go to like a keyboard mode here, all right, and I can actually have the pitch sort of follow based on the keyboard. So that's fun, and I can hold it. Where it really starts to get cool, like if I wanted to do this, is where I can add the feedback in. And then I could start to add in and start to change the way that the effect, essentially works. And then I could start to bring in delays, or work in from here. Now, the way that they say the feedback, they sort of they actually, when you work with it, because I could work with it just in the delay only mode, and then just kind of working, and it's what they sort of call a reverb effect, although it's a little bit of a kooky kind of a version of that. So I can kind of get work this in with different things. Now it starts to get really cool when you start to work with like some of the envelope control. And so you get the idea. You really have like all kinds of wacky stuff when you really start getting into it. And it's very much the type of effect where it becomes like an instrument when you start working with it, and then it becomes sort of an entity into its own. There's also an anti-feedback control. So this is what I was talking about before. And so with just like this is like just a simple bass sound, and when you start adding in other elements, you can do simple things almost without this, where you're doing. And then as you start to add in feedback, and then as you do it, you can do all kinds of, as you could see, just like crazy fun effects in terms of sweeping things. Very unique processor. It's like when this came out, it's like um, I don't think a lot of people knew what to exactly make of it, but it found its way onto some really, really amazing classic records. And if you go to the Universal Audio website, you can find more information about that and what particular things to listen to. But a very cool plugin. I think very true to the sound and the character and the way that the original works. So just having worked on the original, when you just start grabbing it, maybe the frustration would be, or the better way to do would be to set it up on a work surface and assign all the controls to different knobs, and then being able to kind of play it and then just record the effect. So whether you're recording it as automation and just kind of sweeping it in and just kind of having that programmed, or whether you record it as actual audio, you can have a lot of fun. There's also a thing here when working with the pitch. There's a glide control which sets how quickly it responds. So there's sort of like a portamento kind of thing. There's just so much to it. When you really dig into it, you can really have a lot of fun with it. It's a very, very, very cool processor. Not one that you're using to pitch correct your vocals. So like in terms of a harmonizer, the idea originally, one of the ideas was that a vocalist would be able to sing on stage, have this set with the keyboard, and then they would actually be able to play the harmony parts and have this in real time do the harmonies to whatever it was they were singing. But in terms of the sonic tonal character, it wasn't particularly natural sounding. So it's not the type of thing that you would use so much for that effect. But if you use it in more subtle ways with the delays, you can actually create very cool, like just like subtle spreading, doubling effects. Part of that comes from the fact that the clock is jittery, so you get this sort of automatic double tracking type of thing effect. So from a technical perspective, you can get into more slap, double taking, sort of semi-chorus flange type of effects. It's hard. You can't really get into flange effects because the delay time doesn't go down low enough. But that's kind of the way that another way that you can kind of use it in a more simple fashion. A very cool one though. Great plugin and a great modeling by Universal Audio. The Eventide Clarkworks Model H910 Harmonizer by Universal Audio. That's the plugin of the week.